This episode of Data and Dissonance contains discussion of a recent act of violence at a high-profile political event, as well as commentary on public reactions that some listeners may find disturbing or unsettling. We will be addressing not only the facts of what occurred, but also the emotional, cultural, and political responses that followed, including some of the more extreme and inappropriate reactions that surfaced online in the immediate aftermath. As always, this show is built on open dialogue and perspective. The opinions expressed by the hosts and panelists are intended to encourage critical thinking, not to promote harm, hostility, or division. We recognize that topics like this can be sensitive, especially when they intersect with politics, safety, and human behavior. And we approach them with the goal of understanding, not inflaming. Listener discretion is advised.
Saturday night, Washington, D.C. A room filled with power, influence, media, and carefully controlled messaging. And in a matter of seconds, that control cracked. The White House Correspondents Dinner, one of the most secured, most watched, most curated events in the country, went from polished political theater to something very real, very fast. Shots fired near an event with the President of the United States in the building. Panic, movement, evacuation, and just like that, the illusion that some places are untouchable. Gone. But here's the part that hits even harder, and honestly, tells you more about where we are right now than the event itself. While people were still trying to figure out what happened, while security was locking things down, while people in that room were still processing the moment, there were already reactions online. Not concern, not relief that it wasn't worse, but jokes, applause, comments hinting that they wished it had been worse. Let that sink in. Because we've reached a point where violence tied to politics doesn't just shock people anymore. It divides them. Some see it as a tragedy avoided. Others see it as an opportunity missed. And that right there, that's not just a security issue. That's a cultural one. And tonight, we're not just talking about what happened in that room. We're talking about what it revealed outside of it. All right, let's bring in the crew, because this one's layered, and everybody's coming at it from a different angle. Brian's here, bringing that MAGA fire, already looking at this through the lens of strength, failure, and whether this should have even been possible in the first place. Rachel's with us, steady, grounded, cutting through the noise to separate fact from spin, because there's going to be a lot of both. Daniel's in the building, connecting dots, questioning narratives, and probably already looking at how this story evolves over the next 48 hours. And Skylar joins us, bringing that pushback, that perspective that challenges the room, especially when things start leaning too far one way. And me, I'm Artie. And tonight, we're talking about what happens when control slips, even for a second. So let's ground this before we get into the reactions, because the details matter. Saturday night, White House Correspondents Dinner, thousands of attendees, heavy security presence, Secret Service everywhere, and yet, an armed individual makes it close enough to fire shots near the event. Not inside the ballroom, but close enough that people heard it, reacted, and for a moment, everything shifted from controlled environment to real-world chaos. The suspect is stopped, taken into custody, no mass casualties, and thank God for that. But let's not pretend that outcome erases how serious this was. Because when shots are fired at an event like that, with that level of leadership and visibility, you're not talking about a minor incident. You're talking about something that could have gone very differently, very quickly. So Rachel, let me start with you. Strip the noise away, strip the politics away. What actually happened here, and how serious was this moment?
What happened was serious, and I think that needs to stay the foundation of this conversation before anything else gets layered on top of it. An armed individual made it close enough to a highly secured event to fire a weapon, which immediately raises two truths at the same time. The system worked in the sense that the threat was quickly contained and prevented from escalating into something far worse. But it also revealed that there was enough of a gap for that moment to occur in the first place. Where people are going to get pulled in different directions is in how they interpret that balance. Some will call it a failure because it happened at all. Others will call it a success because it was stopped. But the reality is more complicated than either of those extremes. This was a high-risk situation that didn't turn into a catastrophe, and that outcome matters. But it doesn't eliminate the need to understand how close it came to being something much worse, and what that says about security, preparation, and response moving forward.
Yeah, and that middle ground is where the real conversation is, but it's also the place people seem least comfortable staying, because it forces you to admit that things can go right and still not be perfect, that you can stop something and still ask how it got that close. But Brian, let me bring you in, because I already know your angle here. You've got someone getting close enough to fire shots at one of the most protected events in the country. Are you looking at this as a system that worked, or a system that got exposed?
I'm looking at it as a system that got exposed, because when you're talking about that level of security, the expectation isn't, we handled it after it started. It never gets to that point. And I think people are trying to soften that reality because the outcome wasn't catastrophic. But that doesn't mean the situation wasn't serious. Because here's the thing, if this person gets a few steps closer, a few seconds further, or executes this differently, we're having a completely different conversation right now. And that's not hypothetical, that's reality. So yeah, credit where it's due for stopping it quickly, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend this doesn't raise major concerns about how it was even possible in the first place. And honestly, what makes it worse is seeing some of the reactions afterward. Because if people are watching something like this and thinking it didn't go far enough, instead of being grateful it didn't get worse, that tells you there's a deeper issue than just security.
That's the part that sticks with people, the how close was this factor. Because once you realize how quickly something like this can shift, you don't just go back to thinking everything's airtight. But I want to stay on what you just said for a second, because this isn't just about the event anymore. It's about the reaction to it. Daniel, I'm going to bring you in here. Because while people are focused on the surface, the shooting, the response, you've also got this wave of online reactions that are, honestly, disturbing. What does that tell you about where things are right now?
It tells me that we're not just dealing with division, we're dealing with dehumanization, and that's a much more dangerous place to be. Because when people start responding to violence or near violence with anything other than concern or relief, it means the lines that used to exist between disagreement and hostility have started to erode. And the environment we're in right now amplifies that. Social media rewards extreme reactions. Algorithms push the most emotionally charged responses to the top, and suddenly, what might have once been fringe sentiment starts to look more common than it actually is. But perception matters, because even if it's a minority, when those voices get visibility, they shape how people see the broader culture. So what you're really looking at here is a feedback loop. An event happens, extreme reactions surface, those reactions get amplified, and then they reinforce the idea that things are more polarized, more hostile, and more unstable than before. And over time, that becomes self-sustaining.
Yeah, and once that loop starts, it's hard to slow down, because now it's not just about what happened, it's about how people interpret each other based on those reactions. Skylar, let me bring you in here, because stepping back from the politics of it, what does it say when moments like this don't just shock people anymore, but actually split reactions in a way where some people are almost desensitized to it?
It says we're dealing with a level of tension that's been building for a long time, and events like this expose it more than they create it. When people feel disconnected, frustrated, or unheard, those emotions don't just disappear. They show up in how they respond to moments like this, sometimes in ways that are extreme or inappropriate. But I think it's important to be careful about how we interpret those reactions. The loudest voices online aren't always representative of the majority. And there's a risk in taking the worst examples and projecting them onto entire groups of people. That can deepen division instead of addressing the underlying issues. Because at the end of the day, most people, regardless of where they stand politically, don't want violence, don't support it, and don't celebrate it. The challenge is not letting the most extreme reactions define the entire conversation, while still acknowledging that those reactions exist and need to be addressed.
And that's where this lands, right in that uncomfortable space between what happened and how people reacted to it. Because, yeah, the situation was contained. Yeah, it didn't turn into the worst-case scenario. But that doesn't mean it wasn't close. And it doesn't mean the reactions afterward didn't reveal something deeper. Because when you start seeing moments like this not just shock people, but divide them, when you start seeing reactions that go beyond anger into something darker, that's not just about politics anymore. That's about where we are as a culture. And maybe that's the part people need to sit with a little longer. Not just the event itself, but what it exposed. About security, about perception, and about each other.
If there was ever a moment to remind yourself what you stand for and to wear it proudly, this is one of those moments. Head over to the Data and Dissonance merch store and check out the full lineup. Because this isn't just about apparel, it's about identity, mindset, and message. Whether it's the I Identify as American hoodie, the classic 1776 tee, or one of the newer designs that push back on the noise and the nonsense, every piece is built to say something without you having to say a word. And if you're more of a coffee person, which, let's be honest, most of us are, don't sleep on the blends. High Lakes for that clean, light start to your day. Rock Creek if you want something balanced and smooth. And Bitterroot if you're the type that likes it strong, bold, and unapologetic. It's not just merch. It's part of the brand, part of the lifestyle, and part of what keeps this show going. Everything you need is in the description. Gear up, support the show, and represent what you believe in.
There's something about moments like this that don't just pass, they stay with you. Not because of what officially happened, not because of the statements that come out afterward, but because of what almost happened. That's the part people carry. That realization that for a brief window of time, things were closer to chaos than anyone in that room or watching from the outside would have been comfortable admitting. And once you see that, once you feel that shift, it changes how you look at everything else moving forward. Because we all operate under this assumption that there are levels to security, levels to control, levels to protection, and that at a certain point, those levels become absolute. That there are rooms where things just don't happen. But this proved something different. It showed that no matter how controlled an environment appears, there's always a line. And sometimes that line gets tested in ways that remind people just how fragile that sense of control really is. Not broken, but not untouchable either. And then there's the part that honestly hits even deeper, the reaction. Because when something like this doesn't just unify people in relief that it didn't get worse, but instead exposes how divided reactions can be, that's where things start to feel different. When some people respond with concern, others with indifference, and a few with something darker. That's not just a reflection of the event. That's a reflection of where we are. And whether people want to admit it or not, that matters. So the question isn't just how this happened, or even how it was handled. The real question is what we take from it. Do we learn from the cracks that showed themselves? Do we pay attention to the reactions that revealed something deeper? Or do we move on, let it fade, and wait for the next moment that forces everyone to stop and look again? Because moments like this aren't just events, they're signals. And whether people listen is what determines what comes next. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
This episode is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series, including The Covenant Protocol and Black Echo Rising. If you're into stories that don't just entertain, but actually pull you into a world of power, hidden agendas, shifting control, and high-stakes decisions, this series is built for exactly that. These aren't surface-level thrillers. They're layered, intense, and designed to keep you thinking long after you finish the last page. And that same energy carries over into the music. Artie's albums, Uncaged and Four Wheelers and Hallelujah, bring two completely different sounds but the same core identity. One raw and gritty, the other grounded and soulful, both tied into the same message you hear on this show. Real, unapologetic, and built to connect. If you want more of what you hear here, more depth, more story, more perspective, you'll find it all there. Links are in the description.